Welcome to We the Waste People podcast, where two Southern metalheads, a Gen Xer and an elder millennial, discuss the news, break down class politics, and share what it's like to be working class leftists in the heart of Dixie.
Today we'll be sharing about what's been going on in our personal lives since we last recorded. We'll also continue on in our class discussion series with the final 4 chapters of Nancy Isenberg's book, White Trash, The 400-Year Untold History of Class in America.
And lastly, we'll end today's show with our favorite and most important segment, Lifestyles of the Looting Class, where we spotlight one absurdly rich oligarch and remind you why we can't have nice things. I'm John Brown.
And I'm Butterfly Screams.
This is We the Waste People podcast. Thanks for tuning in. So how have you been?
I'm doing okay. How about you? I know you have a pretty rough story to share with us.
Yeah, it's been a hell of a it's been a hell of a 2 weeks since the last we spoke as far as podcast form goes. I was terminated by text a little over a week ago today.
Oh God, that's so crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely was pissed, but I saw it coming. I mean, again, it was my second time at the company, so I went against my gut instinct in the first place. So back in 2017, when my wife and my youngest son moved down here, me returning them for the first time to the Mid-South area, I've never been one to wait on a specific job. So when I first started putting in applications, because I did not have anything lined up when we moved down, one of the first places to call me was a dealership in the area for sales. And I was like, what the hell? Let me give it a shot. And in there, I met, so my second used car sales manager at that dealership is important to the story because he's the one that recruited me to, let's call it Bob's used high-end cars in 2021. And we'll call my used car sales manager from the original dealership Chief. That's his nickname he likes to go by.
Okay.
So Chief, I left that first dealership, tried another dealership, didn't work out in the dealerships, went on to a couple of other things, found a temporary, it was supposed to be temp, seasonal style thing for COVID for a large grocery retailer that most people know about. And I turned that into a assistant manager role there. And probably within 90 days of me starting at that grocery store, Chief came in and saw me and was like, "Hey, what are you doing here?" And, I just kind of gave him a quick update. And he's like, "Well, look, I'm at Bob's High-End Used Cars. I could use a salesperson. Want to come join me? We're making great money." I'm like, "Nope, don't want anything to do with sales." Okay, cool. So 6 months goes by, he's like, "Hey, you ready?" Nope. So finally 2 years of me being at the grocery store, I was fed up with grocery store business. And he came back in and was like, "Hey, I got a different role for you. You might be interested in." And it's what they call a recon manager. And my responsibility was to oversee getting the used cars that were bought or traded in ready for sale. And there's a few different things in there I won't bore you with, but yeah, so that's how I ended up in let's see, it would have been about September of 21. And then, like I said, I've told you before that I spent 12 years in the pawn industry, corporate pawn. And I thought, people could be rude there, but people are extremely rude in the grocery store. Customers, that is. Now, that's not everybody, but a large portion of them, enough of them that it's enough that day after day after day, when you're already short-staffed, when you're doing everything you can just to keep up with the expectations and demand that the corporation puts on you.
I can imagine.
When he explained what the job was, I was like, you know what? Let me talk to my wife and I'll reach out. And so I wasn't in this position at the used car lot. I wasn't in sales, which was a big motivation for me It came with a salary with a potential bonus. Of course, we never met the conditions for the bonuses, which was just one of the many reasons I left. Um,
Are they like unachievable type goals?
oh no, so no, man. So up until like July of 2021, they were knocking those goals out of the park every single
Mm.
month for years. And again, this is a fairly high-end pre-owned used car lot. So it's this weird little niche that they had. Um, but we'll talk about Bob real quick and some quick things to know about him. Bob started his automobile business in his driveway in the mid 80s, technically his parents. But Bob didn't have to pull himself up by the bootstrings by any means. His parents were fairly well off to begin with. Bob Sr. had a road construction business that had many state contracts, and I'm pulling from memory here, so I'm almost positive that at least some of his Bob Sr.'s employees were prison labor. But again, that was close to 4 years ago when I was told that. And so when Bob Jr. was ready to grow his business, he didn't have to find a location for the car lot. He just used the property his dad owned from the construction business that he was no longer using because he had retired. Um,
How nice for him.
right? Yeah. So definitely no pulling yourself up by the bootstraps. Now that's not the. Let me be clear. There are some good things about Bob. I'm going to tell you a few things that aren't so good. But when I first started there, one of the things that impressed me was that the used car technician had misdiagnosed a vehicle they took in on trade and noise a couple of times to the tune of probably $2,500, which is not cheap on vehicles. When you're trying to resell a vehicle, there's not a whole lot of room in your profit margins. Now, at this time, I'm sure there might have been a lot more room because the used cars did a crazy thing where their value just skyrocketed during COVID. But Bob and I went around the block, and he was in some nice khakis and a nice button-up shirt, and we ran up and down the road a couple of times, and he's like, "I think I know what it is." And he hops out, and I kid you not, he crawls up underneath the truck in those clothes, and he goes, "Yep, there it is." And it was one of the points of connection was loose and was kicking up when you'd go to take off, so it hit the bottom of the truck chassis. Um, so that was one of the few things, and there were other things. So one of the first things I learned about Bob was Bob's belief system in a conversation with Chief, the sales/finance manager. And again, Chief is my second used car manager at the first dealership I was at. I was interviewing someone for a potential tech in the back, and went up to Chief to discuss the new hire. And Chief asked, "Are they Democrat or Republican?"
Ugh.
And I looked at him just dumbfounded. I was like, "I'm sorry, what? Politics never came up." I said, "What do you mean? Are they?" I said, would have no idea." He goes, "Well," he said, "Bob classifies white people as Republican and black people as Democrats."
Oh
And I
my
was like,
goodness.
"Oh my." Um, yeah. Again, so just you could imagine the absolute puzzled look I had on my face.
Okay,
Um,
this is probably a dumb question, but I just want to make sure. Assuming this Chief and Bob people, they're white, correct?
yes, ma'am.
Okay, but I just needed to make sure before I say this. It's always been one of my biggest pet peeves about white people, and that is the racist white folks, is they always just assume that you're cool with some casual racism. You know what I mean? Like, I can't tell you
Yeah.
how many times I've had somebody just casually drop the N word to me, and they did it because I'm white, and therefore it's okay. Oh my God, it's so uncomfortable, and it's awful. I hate it. I'm so sorry that happened to you.
Yeah. Um, so it gets better. I mean, not really, but the story's better, I guess. It's a fun story. So twice in my first time there, he stated, and again, this was towards the end of 2021, beginning of 2022. So COVID had basically the peak of COVID sickness is gone. They got up to like 120, 21 cars in July. and then in like, or maybe it was June, and then July they were down back to under 100, and then August it was maybe 60, and then when I showed up in September, they didn't break 50, and 50 was that bonus point. So part of my pay structure was that, for every car, once you reach 50, for every car we sell over 50, you get I think it was like a $50 per car bonus. So if you think about July's numbers, 121, so you've got quite a few cars over 50 that you're getting $50 on.
So that's
Plus
the
your,
bonus you were referring to earlier? Okay, I see,
yeah.
I see.
So when I started in September of 21 until the time I left in November of 23, they never broke 50 cars sold in a month again. So twice in that time frame, he literally made a comment, and I'm gonna, just kind of give you a rough idea of what he said because I can't remember verbatim, but he said he really needed the economy to tank. It's unfortunate, but for people like me to thrive, other people need to suffer.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh my.
Yeah.
There's no way I could do it. I'll probably. Yeah, I would have lost my ever loving mind right then and there.
Oh yeah. And again, I enjoyed the job. I was, very selfish in this. No customer facing. I had not been in a job where I wasn't customer facing that I enjoyed in a long time, and I enjoyed this. And one of the other kind of under the table perks that I had was that I had a demo vehicle. I didn't have to drive my own vehicle. And these are high-end cars. These aren't cars I would drive in my everyday life. So yes, I was being selfish in that. I enjoyed that. Um, and then summer of 23, late summer, we were in another meeting, and he started on a rant about the lot porter. And anybody else besides him that worked for the dealership would tell you that Jay, and we'll just leave it at Jay, was the absolute hardest working man on the block, right? Not just a dealership, but probably in a good 10-mile radius. Jay was the absolute hardest working man. And Bob had a issue with the way he had handled a piece of lawn equipment. And so in the meeting, Bob decides to make the statement, wouldn't he just be happier back on the cotton plantation, just picking cotton, not having to think? I mean, wouldn't he just be happier back as a and he didn't come right out and say the word slave, but that's what he was driving at.
Wow. You're making it so apparent to me just what a bubble I've lived in for a very long time, because I mean this sort of just like blatant, just in your face, like cruel, like racist remark. I can't say that I've ever had to deal with that. That's insane.
And then let's see, a couple of other little things. I'll touch on one more, I think, and then just kind of tie it all together. Within about 30 to 45 days of my deciding I'm done, I've had enough. I would just happen to be in his office with his accountant for the dealership, and I don't even remember how the conversation came up because I didn't approach a raise. And then this is, towards the end of me being there for 2 years and not had a raise, not had a bonus. And he just brings it up and it's like, we just can't do a raise for you. There's just no room for it. And shortly thereafter, not he himself, but the sales team had somebody come through working in a small team who had using some identity theft paperwork and stuff. Somebody else's identity. It was her driver's license picture, but she had the identity information of someone else and was working with a couple of other people. Bought a car, technically financed a car under this other person's information. And to keep it from hitting his insurance as a claim, what he ended up doing, I worked with him. I was in the car with him when this happened. He literally took $5,000 after connecting with her. I don't remember how they connected. But he took $5,000 in cash. We drove down to a town that's maybe 25 minutes south of where the dealership's located, to a warehouse area, and we drove down the road where nobody else would be. He holds up the $5,000 cash in an envelope so that they could see it, and drops it at this little intersection, and drops it on the ground, and we take off. And then they wound up leaving the car. We go and we kill like an hour and a half, 2 hours, and they end up leaving the car where we left the cash. He doesn't handle emotions well, so like when he's angry, he takes it out on people around him in different ways, and usually the things that make him angry are things that are going on in his personal life. But the people
Who,
that
this chief guy?
No, Bob.
Bob.
So
Okay.
and this is Bob that I was just riding with, by the way.
Okay.
So when he was angry with something in his personal life, he'd take it out on his employees. And within about 90 to 120 days, he threatened to close the doors. So I had started losing sleep over all of it. I'd talked to my wife, and I really got to thinking about, one of my really close friends back in Indianapolis, which is where we moved down here from, with a short stint in Illinois. And that person happens to be a black man. We'll call him CS. That's his initials. We had gotten so close that he made me the godfather of his
I got you.
second to youngest daughters. And I have failed. I have failed as a godfather. But I decided to leave, thinking about him and his family and a couple of other people. And I was like, I can't do this anymore. So I decided, and I didn't want to ever have to go. I didn't want to go back. So I was like, I'm not even going to put in a 2-week notice. So I took a car home like I always do on a Friday. Got to the house. Sunday, drove back up there, which I never go in on a Sunday. I took all my stuff out of the office. I left the keys to the office there on the other manager's desk, the shop manager, that is. And I left 4 different people a slightly different letter of resignation, and just kind of going into different details why I was leaving, or not going into details for some. But for Bob, I broke it down as to why I was leaving. And so the day that he found out, the following Monday, he was coming back from a week-long vacation. And every morning he would always send out these texts right around the time he knew I was going to be at the lot, of things he wanted me to get going. And so he'd sent this list of texts, and I didn't respond. And then he sends me one, "Hey, I just heard from Chief. I'm so sorry to hear that." He's like, and then I get texts throughout the day, "Hey, I was just going to have you, get you a $5,000 raise." I was like, "Are you freaking kidding me?" I didn't buy it, right? I don't believe this, because again, he's a salesperson. People like him aren't trying to sell you because they want you there. They're just trying to sell you so they win. So I'll end it by saying that over a year and a half, I went a year and a half away from that dealership, but didn't go more than 6 weeks without hearing from Bob or Chief via phone call or text. "Hey, are you ready to come back? Hey, you're ready to come back." Finally, I gave in for a few different reasons. Talked to the wife about it. And we're like, okay, we know the boundaries. He's agreed to not talk anything political, not to make any stupid comments around you. Take the deal. He gave me more money. So I took the deal. And that was this last April. In roughly late July, they found out that the shop manager there at the time, and again, I was recon manager, they found out he was stealing. And they didn't have a dollar amount at that time. They started investigating it, but in the meantime, they had us switch positions. And then literally the middle of August, I'm back at the desk of the shop manager, taking phone calls, setting appointments, dealing with some other stuff. And Chief walks through the door of the shop with 2 police officers behind him. "John, These two men are here to see the other manager, or the former shop manager, rather. Okay. And Chief turns around and hightails it back up front. So I open up the shop door and I step in and I'm like, hey, former shop manager. And before I could say another word, the two officers were right behind me and I wave him over and I say, these two guys are here to see you. And I kid you not, they didn't say a word. They just turned him around and handcuffed him.
Ooh, that's
So
intense.
yeah, about 3 weeks after that, we're fighting to keep things rolling. We're looking for techs, looking for another recon manager. And Bob comes back and's like, hey, this tech made some mistakes. He needs to go. Okay. So I wind up letting him go at the end of the day. The next day, Chief comes back and he's like, hey, listen, Bob's decided we're going to cut this down to the bare minimum. So we're going to go down to just you, T, which was the recon technician, and then the two detail guys. And by the way, I had just 2 weeks prior to this day had hired my son on as a lube tech just to do oil changes so the other couple of guys could focus on bigger projects. So I had to turn around that day. So 2 weeks after hiring my son, I had to let him go. And then we turned around at the end of the day and let go of the new lot porter. So that happened on a Tuesday, the Tuesday after Labor Day. Chief comes back and he's like, hey, Bob wants to shut down no more appointments for next week. We're going to, get everything cleaned up, all the old business from the previous manager out of here. Okay. And I asked Chief, I'm like, hey, do I need to call my current appointments for next week and tell them we need to reschedule? Nope, just no more appointments. Okay, cool. But that Tuesday morning, Chief comes back and he's like, hey, Bob has decided he wants the shop completely shut down for this week. So no new business at all of any kind. So a few more things happen throughout the week. We deal with a few customers that had appointments that weren't called, who were upset. Thursday night, I'm back at home and I get a text from Bob, and Bob said, hey, John, give me a call. Need to discuss something with you. Okay, cool. So I call him and he never texts me this late. So I call him. He's like, hey, Chief and I were just talking and wondered if maybe you'd be more comfortable if you just went back to focusing strictly on recon and let me bring on somebody else, a shop manager, to rebuild the shop while you just focus on recon. Would you want to do that? I'm like, no. He's like, so you want to focus on rebuilding the shop and you take the shop manager. And by the way, the recon manager to the shop manager had a significant pay increase.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, no, I'd rather, try to get it rebuilt. Well, okay, but you're going to have to go back to the recon manager's salary, rebuild the shop, keep up with basic maintenances of customers coming in, and maintain recon.
God.
I was not happy. So Friday comes along and I was pissed. So I go up front and I'd already heard from somebody because I helped my son get a job at another dealership real quick. And that person, when they found out what was going on at Bob's Used Cars, called someone else he knows. And I got a call from that person. That person had just asked me, said, hey, are you happy? And I'm like, not as I was. So at the end of the day, Friday, this last Friday was a week, that is. I go up and I tell Bob, Chief. I go up and I talk to Chief because Bob's not there. Hey man, look, I'm not okay with this. I'm not okay with the fact that he wants me to do all this for the lower pay, but he was willing to have me go just and focus on the recon and bring on somebody to try to regrow it. So there's a possibility I may come in Monday and give you guys my notice. And Chief is like, okay, don't do anything yet. Take the weekend, think about it. Call me Sunday night. Okay, cool. That's where we left it. Saturday morning, I'm out shopping with the family, grocery shopping, and I get a text from Bob. Hey, John, can you give me a call real quick? Okay. I didn't respond right away because, like I said, we were shopping. Not even 2 minutes later, I get another text. John, we've decided to go a different way back there. Your services are no longer needed. Good luck.
Dude, there's just so many, like, I guess, suspicious things that it just something was not right about what was going on behind the scenes. Like, there had to be, I don't know. I don't know. How are you dealing? Because it's such an insane story. I'm pretty much speechless. Like, other than, are you okay?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the person that I called for my son to get another job, he and I go back to early 2018. The second dealership I ever went and tried to sell cars for, he worked for that dealership in a different capacity back in the shop. And he's actually who I went and worked with when I left Bob's Used Cars the first time. And he's the one that called a friend of his at another dealership and said, "Hey, and this is a brand new dealership that opens for business tomorrow, and I'll be
Wow.
starting there in a role there." But I've taken the last week and gotten a lot done around my house. I have shoveled gravel galore. I
That's
spent the
awesome.
day baking a cake. Just did some other yard work and did a few other things. But
Yeah.
I'm good now. But I definitely started this week off really, really pissed off at the way it went down, and I got nobody to be pissed off at but myself. I knew that that the scorpion was a scorpion when I decided to let him cross the river on my back, and he
Mm,
stung me anyway.
mm. I don't know, man. He just sounds like a really shitty human being. Like, honestly, he shouldn't even be allowed to run his business the way that he does. Like, I mean,
Oh, yeah, I won't. I'm not going to do that. But there are quite a few things I could tell you, and you'd be like, "How does he get away with it?"
yeah,
And
like, people like him, these, like, not everything is above board. Like, it just, the
yeah,
way you just described everything,
yep.
no, like, legitimate business person or serious business person for that matter that cares about rules and the law and doing things above board. Yeah, no.
Yeah,
That guy is up to some things.
again, this is somebody that has been in business at that location since the mid '80s.
Yeah.
And when anything like what you're talking about happens, literally what anybody would say is they would just basically quote the location of where the dealership is. I'm not going to quote it because then you could figure it out, but people could
Mhm.
figure it out, and I don't want to do that. Um, but yeah, they would just quote the location of where the business is at. Only on could you get away with those things. So, but yeah, that's been my last few weeks.
I'm so sorry. I'm just so thankful that you've got something, as quickly as you did to move on to. It may not be what you want, but surely it's like a jumping off point for something else.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And that's the thing. Like I said in the beginning of all this, I am not someone who's just gonna. I'll never sit around and wait for a specific opportunity to come along. Um, I've had that mindset of I'm not gonna go without a job very long.
Hmm.
Um, because and there's that old saying that it's easier to find a job when you have a job.
Yeah, for sure.
So
Yeah. Man, and not only that, but capitalism is hard. Really hard.
unless you're a capitalist,
Yeah, exactly. And unfortunately, we do not have capital.
that's
So,
right. We do not. We just got the labor.
right, right. So, but no, like I told you then, let me know if there's any way, any possible way I could, help or whatever, support you guys. Um, you know, I'm here in whatever way you need.
Yeah, and I tell you what, that means so much to me and to my family, and I appreciate it.
Okay, well, thanks for sharing your story. It's pretty wild, man. Pretty wild.
All right, guys, let's get into the class discussion this week. We're going to pick up on chapter 9. We're going to pretty much keep the same condensed version that we did last episode on these chapters.
Okay, chapter 9 is called Forgotten Men and Poor Folk, Downward Mobility and the Great Depression. The 1930s exposed the deep poverty and systemic failures of the South, where both whites and African Americans endured lives of dependency, exploitation, and degradation. The film I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang dramatized these realities, reinforcing New Deal critiques that the Southern economy lagged behind national prosperity. Reformers like Will Alexander argued that Southern tendency robbed people of self-reliance, requiring not just economic but also psychological rehabilitation to overcome entrenched prejudice against white trash. Convict labor and tenant farming alike revealed a social order in which poor people were deemed expendable, with little chance to improve their condition. The Depression intensified perceptions of waste, of lives, land, and labor, undermining the American dream of upward mobility. Poverty no longer seemed confined to the margins, but threatened working and middle-class families as well. Symbols of dispossession, like the Bonus Army's Hooverville or Dust Bowl migrants in their jalopies heading west, underscored how widespread instability had become. Migrant laborers and displaced tenant farmers represented the fragility of self-sufficiency, while folk singers like Woody Guthrie captured their struggles in song. These groups became visible reminders of poverty's reach, defying the myth that diligence alone secured success.
New Deal programs sought remedies through experimental homestead communities and resettlement efforts. Leaders like Rexford Tugwell envisioned rehabilitating the poor by providing land, education, healthcare, and cooperative farming opportunities. Yet these programs often faltered due to inadequate funding, political resistance, and ingrained Southern hierarchies. Projects like Arthurdale faced criticism for failing to serve the poorest families, while Southern politicians deliberately excluded farm workers from Social Security to preserve control over labor. Nevertheless, reformers like Tugwell and Wallace challenged eugenic notions of inferior heredity, insisting that poverty was social, not biological, and that given equal opportunity, poor whites could thrive. Scholars such as Howard Odom reframed poor whites as a distinct cultural group with their own folkways, challenging stereotypes of laziness and shiftlessness. His research revealed staggering environmental and human cost of Southern underdevelopment, undermining romantic myths of the Old South. Yet Odom's vision clashed with conservative intellectuals like Donald Davidson, who defended agrarian traditions and even praised the Ku Klux Klan for resisting federal reform. In the end, the plight of poor whites highlighted a national blind spot. Many Americans resisted seeing them as fellow citizens rather than a degraded class. For reformers, the task was not just economic uplift, but reimagining poor whites as full participants in American life.
Okay, well, I found the section in this chapter on the Back to the Land movement most interesting. And just quickly for listeners, during the Great Depression, reformers and policymakers promoted a Back to the Land movement as a way to address mass unemployment and rural poverty. The idea was that displaced workers, tenant farmers, and the urban poor could survive by returning to subsistence farming, working small plots of land, and raising their own food. And so for me, it just kind of reminds me of what I'm currently pursuing. I guess you could say I've launched my own Back to the Land movement. As I've mentioned in previous episodes, I traded in city life for rural life because as a longtime political observer and history nerd, I firmly believe that we've reached the slow burn collapse phase of our empire. And honestly, it feels like the dear leader is intentionally accelerating it. I wasn't interested in weathering a systemic collapse in the city, so I've always longed to be closer to nature anyway. So my family and I took a huge risk. Without going into too much detail for privacy reasons, I'll sum it up by saying that we gave up a much more comfortable suburban lifestyle to live in the country on a few acres that had no running water, barely electricity, and certainly no heat when we got here. We have some basic necessities now, but the first year was rough. Like doing dishes on your porch with a pot and a water hose, rough. We converted a 100-plus-year-old barn into a greenhouse using mostly recycled materials. It's definitely been our goal to learn to be more self-reliant and resourceful. And so while we've got a lot more to learn, I have zero regrets. And it dawned on me recently that we're kind of doing our own version of prepping. But we're also resisting the capitalist machine and the Epstein class by living life on our own terms. So that's basically the part of that chapter that I most resonated with.
Yeah, I got to tell you that I've got so much respect for you guys and just admiration for your ability to just walk away from what that comfortable life you have talked about, and just jumping, feet first into this new life that is a lot more work, but I can only imagine has to be so much more self-satisfying.
Yeah, it is. I think a while back, I think I sent you some video of what this place looked like when we first moved in, and there was like nothing.
Yeah, you did.
And so I gotta be honest, and I gotta brag on my husband right now because honestly, like I knew he was always like handy and could like, do quote manly stuff. But oh my God, like it's insane because like everything he's done the plumbing, he's done the electrical, he's done the sheetrocking, the painting. I mean, I was his lovely assistant, of course, but he did the hard part. We were very strategic in how we planned this out before we ever did this. We decided up front, like, who was going to do what and all that sort of stuff. So we all have our roles. We all decided up front, these are the things that we were going to be responsible for. This person was going to bring in the money. This person was going to do this, and this person was going to do that. And we've all stuck to it. And I love it. I love it. What can I say? I love it. Like, I'm so happy. And I've always struggled with like panic and anxiety. And being out here, I've been off medication. I've got a new lease on life. Like the peace that I have now is just, it's so worth it. And I hope that I can inspire others, because I think a big part of this is my desire for community. And so like I've taken my own little family and friends, and like we've made this little tiny little micro community of our own. And we're always like hoping that others will be interested in doing something similar, even if it's where they're located, or if maybe they want to move closer or whatever. I just think that we should all recognize that this country is in a really bad place right now, and it's going to take us relying on one another to get through this.
Oh, absolutely. It's definitely going to take us all relying on each other. And there are people who are, they think, oh, it's all the other races that keep us from being able to be successful. There are people who are like, why would you ever be mad at a billionaire for being a billionaire? And if you take a step back and you really look the oversized impact that the few have on so many, it's disheartening a lot that so many people can't see it.
Yeah.
It blows me away.
Yeah. I always think of that um that I guess graphic or visual of like a pyramid of the social classes, where you've got like the king on top, and then the level below you have like all his like I guess nobility, and then the soldiers, and then under that you have like your I guess merchant class, and then under that you have like everybody else. Like that image is like seared into my mind all the time. And I don't understand why everyone else just like unquestioningly accepts this power structure. You
Uh,
know?
I guess comfort.
Oh, like how is it comfortable? You know, like that's what I want to know. Like, I mean, it's so obvious that you've got just these few people that control our lives, like, and our ability to live freely, happily, healthily, you know, like it's just like I urge anyone that's listening to this, think of that image and just think about how it doesn't have to be this top-down hierarchy that we live in, and that we don't have to give our power away to these elite psychopaths.
Yeah, and I
Period.
mean, especially in a system that's all a construct anyway, right?
Yes. Honestly, the top-down hierarchy exists in so many different facets of our life that we don't even think about, you know?
Yeah,
Like for example, our jobs. Like we have a person at the top. Underneath them, you have like, you know, some slightly less powerful people, but still very fucking powerful. And then under them, you've got, you know, the let's call them the overseers, right? And then which are your management class, right? And then under them you have the workers, and you have the peasants and the laborers and the, you know, normal people. Normal people is what you have at the bottom. You know? So yeah, so that's just another example of that hierarchy that exists that we don't even think about. And it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't. There are bottom up power structures that exist, and it's called direct democracy. But, anyways, I digress. Are you ready to move on to the next section?
sure, let's do it. All right, so chapter 10, The Cult of the Country Boy Elvis Presley, Andy Griffith, and LBJ's Great Society. Elvis Presley and Lyndon B. Johnson, despite seeming like unlikely companions, both challenged stereotypes of poor whites. Presley, the son of a sharecropper, rose to fame while retaining markers of his humble background, while Johnson, a Texas politician with rural roots, sought to shed the stigma of the country bumpkin by embracing modernity and progressive reform. Johnson's Great Society programs, aimed at civil rights and poverty eradication, positioned him as a modern Southern leader who refused to cling to Confederate nostalgia or racist populism. Yet, the old characters of poor whites remain powerful in popular culture. Sitcoms such as The Beverly Hillbillies, The Andy Griffith Show, and Gomer Pyle trafficked in stereotypes of hillbillies, yokels, and rednecks as backwards, foolish, and unfit for modern life. These portrayals echoed longstanding beliefs that poor whites were evolutionary throwbacks. The trailer park further became a symbol of class marginalization, representing not freedom, but decay, poverty, and deviance, especially when contrasted with the idyllic suburban ideal of 1950s.
The persistence of white trash stereotypes was visible in politics, housing, and civil rights struggles. Trailer parks were zoned into marginal areas, denied resources, and stigmatized as breeding grounds of degeneracy, while suburban development reinforced class segregation. Agnes Meyer's wartime reporting and post-war cultural depictions reinforced the idea of trailer trash as a distinct and degraded class. This class identity often intersected with race. Images like the famous photograph of Hazel O'Brien screaming at Elizabeth Eckford during the Little Rock school desegregation crisis captured poor whites as the face of racial hatred, cementing their association with ignorance, cruelty, and bigotry. Writers and cultural critics distinguish between rednecks and hillbillies, but both remain synonymous with violence, rage, and social failure. Johnson's own rhetoric showed his awareness of this dynamic. Publicly, he cast himself as a modernized son of a sharecropper fighting poverty in Appalachia, but privately, he admitted that poor whites could be manipulated by racial pride to mask their economic exploitation. The era's films, literature, and television consistently reinforced the stigma, ensuring that even successful figures like LBJ or Elvis carry the inescapable cultural imprint of class identity. Okay. Sean, did you have any thoughts on that one?
It's just, I don't know. It bothers me because I've always been someone who, like I said, I've said it before that when I was a kid, I was considered a couch potato. I watched a lot of TV, and it bothers me how much the media, like TV and radio and all, just really created narratives, whether they were true or not, to form people's opinion around what classism is or isn't.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, I guess I'd say that this chapter got me thinking about this notion that Southerners are like resistant to modernity. There's this implication that if you or anyone, not just Southerners, prefer a slower, simpler life, perhaps one that is rural, and you make a living by farming or raising livestock, anything not considered civilized or intellectual in nature, well, then you're resisting progress or you're not evolving in some way. And I totally reject that. Like, in fact, I would bet that that sentiment is why there's this hostility between rural and urban culture. Um, I don't know. I was wondering what you thought about that.
Yeah,
Could you give a take?
I definitely think there's some of that, and that theme has been woven in and out of the book since the beginning. Going back to people who weren't really working the land, and if you think about the first couple of chapters when they talked about uh, the Englishmen coming over, and the only thing they saw with the countryside was what they could do with it and what it could do to benefit them money wise. And I don't understand why there's this constant need to do more, more, more. And I get progress, right? I'm not saying I'm anti progress, but growth for the sake of growth is cancer. And I don't understand
Yes.
how that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's how our economic system works. I mean, it requires constant growth. Um, and it's unrealistic and unsustainable. So I don't know why we just again, there's another concept we just kind of like accept without really giving much thought to it, this need that, oh, well, we need growth, 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 growth. And yeah, we've gotta do better about that as a culture and as a society.
Yeah, and when I think about that, I always go back to conversations I've had with people in different ways, and one of them that comes to mind is uh, a Facebook so-called conversation about indigenous people, if you will. And the person was like, "Well, they were savages." And if you know anything about the history of this country, the true history, not the glorified BS that we've been sold, they weren't savages. They lived in harmony with the land. We're the savages. I mean, we cause more death and destruction.
Yeah. Yeah, and I on that note, I'm not a religious person, but I do feel like I have like a spiritual side, if you will, and I'm not saying that all indigenous people felt this way or that this was their like spiritual worldview, but one of the things that I feel like was pretty common amongst a lot of the native cultures was that they understood that we live um what's the word I'm looking for? Like basically like they live as part of nature and they understand that whatever they do, there are downstream effects. You know what
Yeah,
I mean? And so this
absolutely.
harmony and this notion of like balance was always like front and center in how they went about their life. And it was just they respected it. And you know, we have our fancy science these days that we're just now figuring out that, you know, the world is a big complex system and what we do impacts it and all this other stuff. And it's like, man, the indigenous folks have been trying to tell us this for I don't know how long, but yeah, I'm glad we're finally catching up to this fact.
To the
Um,
savages.
yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I definitely resonate with notions of spirituality that very much see ourselves as like part of nature and not just this like um agent of nature who seeks to dominate it. You know what I mean? So,
Absolutely.
yeah. But anyway, that's pretty much all I had for that chapter. Okay, so moving on to chapter 11. It's called Redneck Roots, Deliverance, Billy Beer, and Tammy Faye. By the late 20th century, identity politics reshaped how Americans thought about belonging and authenticity. Social movements like civil rights, black power, and feminism emphasized that marginalized groups must speak for themselves. At the same time, conservatives like Richard Nixon mobilized a different kind of identity politics, appealing to the silent majority of hardworking middle class whites. Unlike groups who could assert ethnic pride, the rural poor had long been saddled with outsider labels such as white trash, imposed by others without their consent. While some began reclaiming the term as a form of cultural heritage in the 1980s, its associations with trauma and deviance remained strong, reinforced in popular culture through depictions like Deliverance. America's obsession with roots highlighted the tension between class and ethnicity. For many, Appalachia symbolized a pure Anglo-Saxon masculinity, while sociologists argued that authentic identities survived only in isolated rural poor communities. The craze for genealogy and authenticity found expression in Alex Haley's Roots, which was celebrated as a monumental recovery of African American history but was later exposed as largely fabricated. Haley's inventions revealed how identity could be reconstructed through storytelling, even while reinforcing conservative ideas of inherited nobility.
Politics and culture in the 1970s and 1980s further blurred these class and identity lines. Nixon and later Reagan appealed to alienated working class whites by contrasting them with welfare recipients, often racialized, despite the reality that millions of poor whites also depended on welfare. Meanwhile, ethnic revivals softened poverty through nostalgia with immigrant foodways and family traditions celebrated by middle class Americans. This same impulse fueled a romanticization of redneck culture from NASCAR's outlaw origins to Dolly Parton's rise and the popularization of redneck chic. Class stigma became recoded into a consumable cultural identity. Figures like Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, and televangelist Jim Baker embodied different versions of these identity struggles. Carter cultivated his small town roots but was revealed to have elite ancestry, while Reagan mastered media performance, rejecting rural authenticity in favor of Hollywood glamour. Baker, along with Tammy Faye, represented both the dream and scandal of white trash excess, rising from trailers to wealth while embodying televangelist corruption. Tammy Faye's flamboyant style and unlikely sympathy for gay men with AIDS showed how camp and performance complicated authenticity claims. Together, these stories reflected how class, culture, and performance shaped the unstable meaning of white trash in late 20th century America. Thoughts, Butterfly?
Well, I found it interesting how working class white, which was historically an economic class category that forces us to think about it in terms of class hierarchy, conveniently becomes a cultural identity where now we think about it in a tribal sense. I am a little bit frustrated about that. I don't mean to diminish the progress, you know, that's been made for other communities. Lord knows they were necessary and needed. but this chapter was just another reminder of how identity gets weaponized, so that we forget about the class issues that are plaguing our society. Um, so yeah, that's probably a hot take, but I don't know. You tell me.
No, I mean, I don't think it really is. I I love seeing there, and I think it's there. I don't think it's large enough, and I think the reason it's not large enough, and what I'm getting to is the focus on class by many people from different cultures um, is growing, and I think that's part of the reason why the elites are pushing so many different things to separate us as hard as they can, because there is that growing class consciousness. Um, I see it in a lot of the social media that I follow through either TikTok or YouTube. There are a lot of content creators who are that's what they're focused on is they understand that racism has been a tool. Identity politics as a whole is a tool that has been used by elites, whether it's elites on the left or elites on the right, but that's been the tool that they've used to keep us fighting amongst ourselves instead of looking up and realizing who's really the problem.
Exactly. Yeah. I feel like it can't be overstated. That's for sure.
No, definitely not. Definitely not.
Okay. Moving on to chapter 12.
All right, so chapter 12, outing rednecks, slumming, Slick Willie, and Sarah Palin. By the 1990s, efforts emerged to rehabilitate the term redneck, treating it less as a slur and more as a badge of identity. Figures like columnist Louis Gizzard pushed to protect hillbilly and redneck under anti discrimination laws, while others framed the label as a marker of agricultural, hardworking roots. Still, the word carried deep ambiguity. To some, redneck meant independence and authenticity, while to others, it still implied ignorance, bigotry, and vulgarity. The cultural negotiation also took shape in literature, where female authors like Dorothy Allison and Carolyn Shute depicted white trash life from within their own class experience. Their novels, Bastard Out of Carolina and The Beans of Egypt, Maine, rejected romanticized views of rural poverty, instead portraying cycles of abuse, shame, and class entrapment. Both writers emphasized how poor women bore the heaviest burdens of poverty and exploitation, with Shute highlighting tribal loyalty and political militancy, Allison focusing on gender violence and resilience.
Though educated and successful, Clinton embraced a touch of Bubba persona, positioning himself as a relatable Southerner from humble roots. This reframing allowed mainstream America to flirt with redneck identity as a kind of leisure performance, putting on Bubba-ness like a costume, while still while still distancing itself from actual working class poverty. Clinton's blend of authenticity and slick political maneuvering underscored both the appeal and suspicions surrounding Southern white masculinity in national politics. The 2008 vice presidential candidacy of Sarah Palin revived and intensified these cultural tensions. Palin embodied a highly visible redneck woman image, part small town hockey mom, part gun toting populace, but became a lightning rod for ridicule, scandal, and class condescension. Her failed campaign, media mockery, and eventual pivot to reality TV blurred the line between politics, celebrity, and spectacle. By then, reality television had already embraced the white trash aesthetic through shows like Honey Boo Boo and Duck Dynasty, packaging rural poverty and redneck culture as mass entertainment.
I got to thinking about both the American political left and American political right have kind of had this back and forth ebb and flow of pushing that um, I guess working class poor person up and trying to grab a hold of that larger voting class. The left did it with Bill Clinton, and honestly, they did it with Jimmy Carter. Then they turned around and the right did it with Sarah Palin. I don't know how, but somehow I feel like they currently see Trump in that light, even though he's never been poor in his life, never been working class. But I feel like somehow they've got him in that light. But then on the other side of it is they also went with the polished, not poor person. When you look at Reagan, well spoken, very polished, um, more so than you'd probably think of when you think of Bill Clinton. Um, Obama was very polished and well spoken. Uh, when you compare him to George W. Bush,
Yeah.
and it's just weird how they fight it when it's convenient, and then they push it when they need it.
Right, right. Yeah, going back to what you were saying about Trump and how he weirdly sort of occupies this space of redneck somehow, some way for a lot of his voters. I was actually thinking about that very thing the other night, and what came to my mind was if you think back to the earlier parts of the book, like actually the beginning, where waste people were literally the convicts, the people that were in prison. They saw it as like prison labor, right? So I couldn't help but think like, is it that the label felon, like, is that why they don't give a shit that he is like, however, what is it, 34-time convicted felon or
Yeah.
whatever? I can't remember the exact
Yep.
number. But is that the left often uses it as an insult. He's a felon. He's a felon. But the right, they don't give a shit. They, in fact, to them, that makes him even more badass.
Yeah.
You
It's
know what I
it's
mean?
so I didn't even think about that connection, but you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
That is the connection. It has to be because like you
Yeah.
said, they absolutely embraced it.
Yeah.
Never surrender. I mean, he did. He literally turned himself in,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
that they it's like this Bonnie and Clyde type thing where, you're idolizing that outcast.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um,
It's the it's somehow for them as like this bucking the system or bucking authority in some way, like that has, let's be honest, that's a long time like tradition and poor white folks communities is,
yes, it is.
questioning and going against authority. So I don't know. Anyway, that I just could not help but see that connection between his felon status going all the way back to the fact that it was the convicts that were brought over here to help build this land. And convicts were, one of the many kinds of waste people that they brought over here.
Yeah, that's it's
That
it's crazy.
it's like this like unconscious thread, I guess, that has spanned like all these years, like all these centuries, in our consciousness. Um, but anyway, so
So, lifestyles of the looting class?
yes, indeed, go for it. Just go off, John. Go off.
All right, everybody. Lifestyles of the looting class. Why we can't have nice things. And I'm really leaning in on trying to connect the dots for people on why, because I see people, like I said earlier, who don't see a problem with people having that much money. And the problem with people having that much money is there becomes a very unhealthy and outsized proportion of influence. And so we're really going to highlight that here with this episode's oligarch and Scooby-Doo villain, Mr. Harlan Crow, aka the puppeteer of at least one SCOTUS justice. So what we usually do is we talk about where they land on Forbes' wealthiest list, just because that's how I like to, I guess, gauge them because that's the easiest thing to do. because that's a stupid list to have in the first place. But he is actually not on the list. He's the first Scooby Doo villain that isn't on the list of Forbes list of wealthiest people. But you don't have to feel bad for him. I'm positive he's not crying for any of us when he's on his super yacht. Uh,
Indeed.
who is he and how did he create his wealth? The quick answer is he's a Nepo baby. He inherited it. His family has been one of the richest real estate dynasties for 2 generations, and he inherited a commercial real estate empire from his father, Trammell Crow. The 74-year-old is the chairman and former CEO of Crow Holdings, a private Texas-based real estate investment and development firm, which manages 29 billion in assets, according to its website. The firm was founded 75 years ago by Crow's father, Trammell Crow, and its massive size at its peak made him the largest landlord in the U.S., according to the New York Times. In the same publication's obituary for Trammell Crow, he was recognized as an innovative developer who once had interests spanning nearly 300 million square feet of real estate, totaling to 8,000 properties in more than 100 cities. This relates perfectly to our last episode and the impact of ridiculously large investment companies and their negative impact on housing for the working class. The Crow family's dominance of the commercial real estate industry stretches back 75 years, is what allows such a massive influence, not to mention an eye-catching art collection. In a story published in the Dallas Morning News in 2014, reporter Mariana Green took a look inside Crow's home, in which she wrote about the paintings on the walls, including one of Adolf Hitler. His collection also included manuscripts, sculptures, and a collection of dead dictator statues. His collections include Romania's Nicolae Kosakis. I'm not sure how to pronounce that.
Koski? Yeah, me neither.
And Egypt's Hosni Mubarak, but he was unable to secure one of Cambodia's Pol Pot. Despite being initially shocked at Crow's owning a Hitler painting, she told the Times that Crow spoke more often of his paintings by Churchill and Bush. Crow says his collection is all about preserving history. Yeah, I'm sure it is. By the way, I didn't mention it in there, but in some of the research I was doing, he also has a autographed copy of Mein Kampf.
Oh my God, that's so funny you say that because I was just about to ask you to pause because I wanted to get your thoughts on the fact that he owned a Hitler painting. And the reason I wanted to know, which, okay, go ahead and tell me how you feel before I tell you this.
Well, let's just go back real quick where I said that, in the interview, she said that Crow focused on, the Churchill and Bush, the paintings of by Churchill and Bush. And of course, he's going to focus on that. He doesn't want people thinking that he idolizes dictators.
Yeah, exactly. I
I
feel
think
like
it's,
that's a big fat duh.
yeah, right. I think it's, I think it leads right into our current times. Bet if we really looked into the thoughts of most of the oligarchs, they all lean towards fascism and dictatorships.
Absolutely. Um, so here's where I confess. I used to own a copy of Mein Kampf. Not because I believe in it or think it's worth anything. I just had it just to have it. Because every year, the university I worked at would put on this like used book sale, and it was there for like I don't know 5 cents or something. And I was like, I think I want to buy this just because I was interested. I'd never read it. Obviously, I know like I'm not. I guess what I'm trying to say is like I got it just for the same reason Harlan Crow supposedly says he has it. I think you can own pieces of history and not necessarily like get down with that history, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And then I'm not going to lie, it did cross my mind that if ever sometime down the road the fascists came beating down my door, I could be like, look, I have a copy of Mein Kampf. I'm one of you.
Oh boy. No, I mean I get it. I don't own the copy of Karl Marx's oh, what is it called?
The Communist Manifesto. And on that
Yeah.
note, I'm glad you said that, because not only did I have Mein Kampf, I had Communist Manifesto, I had Capital, or Das Kapital, however you say that German word. Um, I had all the greats of all these like past figures, because again, it was a used book sale and it cost me 5 cents.
But the other thing is you're a political and history, I don't say nerd in a derogatory way, but you like to understand
I own that shit.
people, right? And that's the whole reason I read, or listened to rather, um, the Communist Manifesto, and I have it on my reading list to get to Mein Kampf. But I can absolutely say that neither one of us have memorabilia, have statues of dictators in our yard. We're not, I have no desire to have that kind of authority over people or that kind of power. And I don't care
Amen.
about the money that much. Again, I've said it before and I'll say it again. Our society, our systems are built on money. The only reason I want money is so that I can have options and be relatively comfortable.
Right. Yeah. Okay, cool. So you're not judging me?
I'm not judging you.
Okay. I promise I'm not a fan of Hitler. It was only 5 cents. Anyway, okay, moving on. Keep going.
All right. So, though you don't hear much about Mr. Crow in the media these days, in late 2023, his relationship and the gifts he gave to Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas was brought to light by reporting from ProPublica. So, you know what they say, justice is blind until the check's cleared. Clarence Thomas, a Supreme Court justice, has received numerous gifts from billionaire Harlan Crow over the years. These gifts have raised ethical concerns, particularly regarding disclosure requirements. Below is a summary of the gifts received, categorized into disclosed and undisclosed items. Disclosed gifts: 2019 trips. Indonesia, a trip that included a stay on Crow's yacht and private jet travel. This trip was initially undisclosed, but later acknowledged by Thomas as an inadvertent omission. Sure, it was. Bohemian Grove, a stay at this exclusive men's retreat in California, also disclosed in the same financial filing. Amended financial disclosures. In June 2024, Thomas amended his financial disclosures to include the aforementioned trips, acknowledging that he should have reported them. Undisclosed gifts, luxury vacations for over 20 years. Thomas has accepted luxury vacations from Crow, including cruises on Crow's yacht, flights on Crow's private jet, specifically a Bombardier Global 5000, private jet flights. At least 3 previously undisclosed private jet trips were revealed during a Senate investigation. May 2017, St. Louis, Missouri to Kalispell, Montana, and returned to Dallas, Texas. March 2019, Washington, D.C. to Savannah, Georgia, and back. 2021, Washington, D.C. to San Jose, California, and back. Other gifts: payments for private school tuition for a relative of Thomas, an undisclosed real estate transaction in 2014 where Crow purchased property for Thomas. Summary of findings: the extent of gifts received by Thomas from Crow is significant, with estimates suggesting that he has accepted nearly $4.2 million worth of gifts over 2 decades, which is substantially higher than gifts received by his fellow justices. The failure to disclose many of these gifts has led to ongoing scrutiny and calls for ethical reforms within the Supreme Court. The situation highlights the complexity surrounding gift disclosures for Supreme Court justices and raises questions about the ethical implications of such relationships. Harlan Crow had stake in 4 SCOTUS cases. The Loper Bright Enterprises versus Raimondo case, decided on June 28th of 2024, remarked a significant shift in administrative law by overturning the Chevron deference doctrine. The doctrine had previously required courts to defer to federal agencies' reasonable interpretations of ambiguous statutes. The Supreme Court ruled that it is the judiciary's responsibility to interpret laws, emphasizing that courts must exercise independent judgment rather than deferring to agencies' interpretations. The ruling allows courts to scrutinize agency actions rigorously, potentially leading to increased litigation as parties challenged agency interpretations. Harlan Crow's benefits from the decision. Harlan Crow, a billionaire real estate mogul, has been linked to several Supreme Court cases, including this one. His financial interests align with a court's decision to overturn Chevron deference, which could benefit his business operations by limiting regulatory oversight. Crow's real estate firm has historically opposed regulatory frameworks that restrict development, and the elimination of Chevron deference could weaken the enforcement of regulations that protect public interest, such as housing standards. The ruling may allow for less stringent interpretation of laws governing environmental and labor protections, which could enhance profitability for businesses like Crow. What's the impact on working class? The Loper Bright decision was expected to have profound implications for the working class, particularly in areas related to labor rights and environmental protections. Potential effects were increased litigation, with courts taking a more active role in interpreting law. Workers may face more challenges in asserting their rights, leading to a rise in legal disputes over employment regulations, regulatory uncertainty. The absence of Chevron deference may create a more unpredictable regulatory environment, making it harder for workers to rely on established protections. Weakened protections. The ruling could embolden employers to challenge existing regulations, potentially undermining protections related to wages, working conditions, and safety standards. Overall, the decision may shift the balance of power away from regulatory agencies and towards businesses, which could adversely affect the working class by reducing the effectiveness of labor protections and increasing risk of exploitation. And I just want everybody to think about the current administration's push to weaken unions and what comes with that. Many of the safeties, many of the so-called liberties that we currently enjoy, let's say a 40-hour work week, 2 days off a week, and many others, are because of unions and regulations that were put into place through unions. Those are looking more and more in jeopardy. But again, all of those, based on the businesses that Mr. Crow is involved in, could have absolutely benefited him, and hurt the American working class. So when I was doing my research on Harlan Crow, I came upon an article from truthout.org, which is listed above and is the start of the above wormhole I went down. In that article was a link to another article regarding Jeannie Thomas, Clarence's wife. Summary over the article discusses the connections between Jeannie Thomas, a conservative activist and wife of Supreme Court Clarence Thomas, and friend of Harlan Crow, a billionaire who funded a right-wing advocacy group called Liberty Central. The group was established in anticipation of Citizens United ruling in 2010, which significantly altered campaign finance laws in the U.S. The organization aimed to influence Supreme Court decisions on various issues, including abortion and affirmative action. Liberty Central was co-founded by Leonard Leo, which will be our next oligarch, a prominent conservative figure, and received substantial financial backing from Crow, who contributed around $500,000 to its launch. The article raises concerns about potential illegal financial activities linked to Jeannie Thomas and the group, especially regarding the discrepancies in IRS filings and the nature of payments made to her consulting firm. The report highlights the broader implications of these connections, suggesting that the influence of wealthy donors like Crow and Supreme Court justices could undermine the integrity of the judicial system. Critics argue that this situation exemplifies the corruption crisis within the Supreme Court, where justices may prioritize the interest of their wealthy benefactor over the needs of the public.
Yeah. The two things that came to mind when you started reading about Jenny Thomas was I think she had a pretty important role in the January 6th riots, or like I feel like she was part of like the organizing that
Yeah,
went
she
on
was.
around that. And then when I saw Leonard Leo, it got me thinking, isn't he like a highly conservative Catholic? Like, because I bet if you once you start digging into like Leonard Leo and Jenny Thomas and actually all these people, you're gonna see some like Zionist money
Yeah.
like flowing all around there.
Yeah, I'm almost positive that you're spot on with that, but I will save my absolute until I've done the research on it.
Okie dokie. Yeah,
Um,
those are just some speculations that came to mind for me.
yeah, but I do think you're right. So, and I just want to do a quick impact on working class Americans from this. So, the implications of this situation for working class Americans are significant. Erosion of judicial integrity, policy outcomes, increased political polarization, and reduced accountability. In summary, the connections between Jenny Thomas, Harlan Crow, and Mr. Thomas, and the influence of dark money in politics pose serious risks to the interests and rights of working class Americans, again, potentially leading to a judicial system that favors the wealthy over the general populace.
There's like this never ending flow of corruption and billionaire money into our politics.
And again, I think that's, it is difficult to say anything else after that. Um, but our goal again is to get people to realize that it is literally a class war in this country, and that
Amen, brother.
everything
Amen.
else is bullshit. The
Preach it.
left versus the right, the black versus the white versus the brown versus the brown versus the whatever. That's all bullshit. I wasn't, you go back to the beginning of this country, my bloodline, would not have been considered white. My dad, the guy that raised me, and again, we're not blood, it's love. Um, he would not have been considered white. It was strictly extremely wealthy, elite English that were considered white, and the reason that we were eventually allowed to be considered white was to protect them from other so-called minority people that they were, using in different ways, including enslavement.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's a continuation of that into today's society.
Yeah. You bring to mind that I noticed that Isenberg mentioned several times the Anglo-Saxon identity and how important that was in terms of like, your lot in life, and especially when it came to matters of like class, the Anglo-Saxon was like above all the others, like all the other identities basically. And so yeah, my dad's side descends from mostly French folk. Um, there was actually a period of time in Louisiana where they experienced a lot of discrimination, even though they were the liliest white French people you ever met. The problem was is they spoke French and they were poor, and so laws had to be written to make sure that they no longer spoke French and assimilated.
That is so
So
fucked up.
yeah, so that's the history of the French folk in Louisiana. Just a little nugget there. Um, so yeah, I totally get what you're saying. All right. Well, that's all we have for today. We hope you're learning something. And most importantly, as John just said a few seconds ago, that the elite class hates all of us and it is a war on the working class. And so, as a reminder, all the sources we use to compile the information in these episodes will be linked to in the show notes. I hope you'll check them out. A lot of good stuff.
All right, everybody. I'm John Brown.
And I'm Butterfly Screams.
And this was We the Waste People podcast. We'll talk to you in 2 weeks.